The year is 1954. The world stands at a crossroads, a moment in time where the past's shadows and the future's uncertainties converge. The world is recovering from the devastation of World War II, a conflict that reshaped nations and left deep scars on the global landscape. Cities are being rebuilt, economies are being restored, and societies are trying to heal from the immense trauma. But even as the world attempts to mend, a new conflict, the Cold War, casts a long and ominous shadow across the globe. This ideological battle between capitalism and communism divides nations and influences global politics. Two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, with their drastically different ideologies, stand as rivals on the world stage. Their competition is not just for political dominance, but for the very soul of the world. This rivalry extended beyond just words. It permeated every aspect of international relations, from diplomatic negotiations to cultural exchanges, creating an atmosphere of constant tension and suspicion. Both sides possessed nuclear weapons, fueling a terrifying arms race. The threat of mutual assured destruction loomed large, a grim reminder of the potential for catastrophic consequences. Proxy wars, where each superpower supported different sides, became tragically commonplace. These conflicts, often in far-flung regions, were battlegrounds for the larger ideological struggle. One such proxy war raged in Vietnam. The country became a focal point of Cold War tensions, with both sides pouring resources and support into the conflict. For years, Vietnamese nationalists, led by Ho Chi Minh, had been fighting for independence from French colonial rule. Their struggle was not just for freedom, but for the right to determine their own future. The conflict had become increasingly entangled in the Cold War, with the communist bloc supporting Ho Chi Minh and the West backing France. This international involvement complicated the situation, making a resolution even more elusive. It was against this backdrop of global tension and a localized but escalating conflict that world leaders decided to convene a conference. The location, Geneva, Switzerland. Known for its neutrality and history of diplomacy, Geneva was the ideal setting for such a critical meeting. The goal to find a peaceful solution to the war in Indochina and hopefully prevent the Cold War from spiraling into a catastrophic global conflict. The stakes were incredibly high, and the world watched with bated breath. The Geneva Conference of 1954 was not merely a diplomatic gathering, it was a pivotal moment in history. The decisions made here would not only impact Vietnam, but could potentially alter the course of the Cold War and shape the future of international relations for decades to come. The spectre of the Cold War loomed large over the Geneva Conference. This gathering was not just a diplomatic meeting, it was a battleground for ideologies where the fate of nations hung in the balance. The United States, under the leadership of President Dwight D. Eisenhower, viewed the conflict in Indochina through the lens of the domino theory. Eisenhower and his administration were deeply concerned that the spread of communism in Southeast Asia would trigger a chain reaction, destabilizing the entire region. This theory posited that if one country in Southeast Asia fell to communism, others would follow, like dominoes toppling in a row. The fear was that the fall of Vietnam would lead to the spread of communism to neighboring countries such as Laos, Cambodia, Thailand and beyond. The Soviet Union, led by Georgy Malenkov after Stalin's death, had its own agenda. Malenkov and his advisors saw an opportunity to expand Soviet influence and counter Western power in Asia. The Soviets sought to expand their sphere of influence in Asia and weaken the position of the West. They aimed to support communist movements and governments, thereby creating a buffer zone of allied states around the Soviet Union. They provided material and ideological support to Ho Chi Minh's Viet Minh forces. This support was crucial in sustaining the Viet Minh's resistance against French colonial forces and later against South Vietnamese and American forces. Meanwhile, France, exhausted and demoralized after years of fighting in Indochina, desperately sought a way out of the quagmire. The war had drained French resources and morale, leading to a growing desire to extricate themselves from the conflict. The French people had grown increasingly weary of the war, and the government in Paris was under immense pressure to find a solution. Public opinion in France was turning against the war, with protests and political debates highlighting the need for a resolution. The Vietnamese people themselves yearned for peace and self-determination. They had suffered greatly, enduring not only the violence of war but also the hardships of colonial rule. They had endured decades of colonial rule and the horrors of war. The struggle for independence was not just a political fight, but a deeply personal one for many Vietnamese who longed for a future free from foreign domination. Ho Chi Minh's Viet Minh, fighting for an independent and unified Vietnam, had garnered significant popular support. Their cause resonated with many Vietnamese who saw them as the best hope for achieving national liberation and unity. The Geneva Conference, therefore, was not merely about finding a resolution to the conflict in Indochina. It was a critical juncture where the interests of multiple global powers intersected, each with its own vision for the future of Southeast Asia. It was about managing the dangerous rivalry between the superpowers and addressing the future of a region yearning for stability and peace. The outcomes of the conference would have far-reaching implications, not just for Indochina, but for the global balance of power during the Cold War era.